Manchester United, Juventus, Manchester City, and other big football teams. Yes, we're deep into the January transfer window, and so we have two legends of the industry on the show today to discuss transfers. That's right, Jon Mackenzie and I will be here throughout the entire show. Also, we're joined by David Ornstein and James Horncastle to discuss football transfers. David, let's start with Jhon Duran, who was the object of a big bid from West Ham. What can you tell me about this situation?
Yeah, so the proposal itself from the Hammers was worth £57 million, inclusive of add-ons. And that's for a player that they've got a long-standing interest in, dating back to last summer when Chelsea and others were also on the scene. And they had already come for him in this January window, but they've upped it significantly in an attempt to bring Aston Villa to the negotiating table. But Aston Villa have kept their hands away from the table because that's nowhere near their valuation. So, of course, rejected if it even needed to be. And they valued Duran more in the region or upwards of £100 million. And they see him as a top talent, 21 years old, with immense goal-scoring prowess and potential. That's why he's attracting interest from all over the game. Yeah. And it's going to give Aston Villa a lot to think about at some point, if it hasn't already, because there's great assets in this PSR world that they've had challenges with, and they've clearly showed that trading is important. They've got another top striker in Ollie Watkins, and it's rare that teams carry two, especially when their manager Unai Emery tends to play with one, and when he played with two in midweek, or for a period of the match, he says it was a mistake on his part. And then, there have been questions about his character, and Emery's talked about how he's needed to learn. He's a young man, and that learning happens in a pressurised environment and needs to be quick before managers sometimes turn away from these players. But for now, they've got no intention of letting him go. And
at least for that much money.
Certainly not for that much money, and let's see what the coming days bring in the market. We're going to be talking about him loads, but for the time being, the sort of concrete development is, West Ham bid £57 million, including add-ons. It's not going to get them the player. I don't think they can go much higher. And there are many around West Ham questioning how they were even able to go that high. Was the bid as credible as was made out? Well, yeah, it was, but it's not going to go any further unless they up it significantly.
We've heard some of the numbers bandied about there by David, but my question, Jhon, is that Jhon Duran has very few minutes at elite football level. I mean, how much has he actually even played?
Yeah, I mean, he's got around 1,500 minutes for Aston Villa from his time there. But I think the big question here is why are clubs so interested in this player? As David says, is because he scores goals and has done so at a very sort of impressive rate. The big question is that going to be sustainable on the basis of the fact that there are so few minutes of data that we have available to us? So let's just run through that data. So this is Jhon Duran's shot map from his time at Aston Villa. So this is a couple of seasons worth of shot data. The thing that people's eyes will be drawn to is he scored 12 goals from 7.4 expected goals. Everyone will say, well, is that sustainable? In the long run, you don't want to be throwing a lot of money at a player who ends up regressing. Actually, interestingly enough, if we look at his performance over time, you can see during his time at Villa, most of the time he has been overperforming his expected goals. So you can see that blue line is above the red line. So the red line is how many you'd expect him to get, and the blue line is how many he's actually got. Now, again, sample size issues here. You can see there's very few minutes available. But
elite players do this, right?
Yeah, and Jhon Duran is a player who he has a really good ball striking action. He hits the ball really hard. There's a lot of players out there who have the same sort of characteristics, who've overperformed their expected goals throughout their career. So Erling Haaland is a great example of that. But I think people get too fascinated by overperformance of expected goals because actually it's not that important if a player is overperforming their expected goals if they're getting expected goals in the first place. So, getting a striker who can score 20 goals from 10 XG is great. If you can get a striker who's getting 20 goals from 20 XG, that's even better. It's a much more sustainable way of getting goals. And so the bigger question, I think, for me is Jhon Duran going to be able to get expected goals at the sort of rate that he's getting so far in this small sample size? And I think that the numbers are pretty good when you look at this. So this is Jhon Duran's time in Chicago in MLS, his shot map from there as well. Again, if you look at the numbers down here, and it's 8 goals from 8 XG, and you're like, okay, well, not as overperforming as he was before. But actually,
MLS is tougher than the Premier League.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. So it would make sense. But I think the interesting thing to look at here is the expected goals per 90, which is the figure in brackets down here. 0.53 expected goals per 90 minutes. That's very similar to the 0.54 that he's been getting at Aston Villa. So already the suggestion that he's getting expected goals at a fairly sustainable rate during his career so far. But it's not just that he's sustainably getting expected goals, he's actually producing expected goals at a really elite rate right now. So this is the highest XG producers in the Premier League this season, everyone with more than 600 minutes. And you can see that Jhon Duran is third on this list, behind Mohamed Salah and Erling Haaland. These are guys who get a lot of expected goals. Jhon Duran is right up there. So
this list makes him look very good, John.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And this is why teams are throwing money at him. Now, I guess the immediate caveat to this would be, well, Jhon Duran is coming off the bench a lot of the time, right? He's a player who has good ball striking, but also very quick. Yeah. So is it just the case that he's coming on against tired legs and getting sort of a boost for his expected goals? So what I'm going to do now is commit a data crime, because I'm going to take a small sample size, make it even smaller. There's 4 games in the Premier League where Jhon Duran has started. And so I was kind of interested to see, is he producing expected goals in those starts? Because if he isn't doing that, then it might suggest that he might not be sustainable as a starting level striker, which is what West Ham want. Actually, in this 240-minute sample that we have here, he's picking up expected goals at around 0.6 expected goals per 90. So that high figure is being maintained even in those games where he's starting.
What we're learning here, though, really is that no team that plays Newcastle should buy him, right? That's the...
Yeah, absolutely. This is the game where he got sent off fairly early on, to caveat that. But actually, another thing here is it's not just that he is getting expected goals on the regular, he's also making his teams better in terms of the amount of chances of goals they're creating. So what I've got here is some viz from Skill Corner in conjunction with Scouted, the football magazine. They did a really nice piece on Jhon Duran, looking at why Villa were so interested in him on the basis of his minutes in MLS. And what Jake Entwistle, who wrote the piece, did was he looked at the dangerous runs that Duran is making. Quick player can get in behind. It would make sense then that he's adding value through those runs. But what he found really interestingly was that actually it's not a high volume of runs that Duran is making. Actually, if you look at the amount of runs that he's making, so this is dangerous runs on one side and then just basic raw runs on the other. The players who are making a lot of runs are in this top right quartile. He's actually in the opposite one, so he's actually not getting a huge volume of runs or dangerous runs. But actually what's super interesting is when you start looking at those runs resulting in goals, suddenly he jumps up. So he doesn't make a lot of runs, but when he does make runs, his team are scoring goals or taking shots within 10 seconds of those runs happening. Right. This is his MLS data. Actually, if we port it over now to the Premier League and do the same thing.
Good Lord.
Jhon Duran is standout. So this is a guy who, he's not making a load of runs, but when he does make runs, more often than not, they are going to result in a goal within 10 seconds. And a lot of these runs, like you can see the percentage here, a lot of them are turning into those goals as well. So this is why I think teams are so interested in him. He scores goals at an incredible rate now, despite the small sample size. There's a suggestion that it could be sustainable. And not only that, he's also helping his teams to create goals as well.
Wow.
Okay, thanks, John. Well, just while we're on Aston Villa, David, former player of theirs, Douglas Luiz, who plays at Juventus now, we hear that there are some Premier League clubs interested in him. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we know his pedigree from Villa. He was at Man City previously, but he didn't actually play for them. I think that was 2017 to 19 before the move. It was a bit of a surprise given he'd been heavily linked with the likes of Arsenal. There was one window where I think they made, I remember reporting like 4 bids on deadline day, all that were rebuffed, and he ended up signing a new contract with Villa. But I think part of the reason he went was their PSR dilemma. He was kind of used to cash in, essentially. And it's not gone to plan so far at Juventus, which we'll get into. But that has alerted clubs in the Premier League, where he's played his best football, to the possibility of bringing him back in a crucial position, that sort of central midfield role that a few clubs are keeping an eye on the market for. And the one that we've reported is Manchester City, because they've got the issue with Rodri being out for most of the season through injury, and they've struggled in that area. So they were always going to survey options, whether or not it was to replace on a temporary basis Rodri, or to build with going forward into the future once Rodri's back and be complementary to him. So Douglas Luiz is among City's options. He's not the only one. At the time of reporting, Juventus were only willing to consider him leaving as a permanent sale or a loan with an obligation to buy, which is essentially the same thing. City are only willing at this moment in time to take him on a loan with no obligation to buy. And so there's a difference in approach there, but that could change as the window goes on. And that suggests it's not an imminent deal, but we're into the last fortnight of the window. So that could develop as the deadline gets closer. From speaking to people around City, they are looking to bring in a holding midfielder. And so that puts him very much in the frame, but it doesn't guarantee he is going to be the one that they end up with. In terms of other potential clubs, there are reports of Chelsea having a little look at the situation as well, because they've suffered injuries in that central midfield department.
They don't have enough players, David. I think
Well, no, they can, I'm sure, add a little more to their stockpile. And I don't know of any other clubs being in the frame. And certainly if Manchester City look to go forward with his signing, and he's a former player and the terms are right, and we've seen that they already mean business with the 3 transfers they've completed so far in this window, then you would assume there's a strong chance of it happening. But this isn't advanced yet. It's certainly, as we say, one to watch.
Okay. Well, it's probably not necessary if it's not advanced yet, but I will take this opportunity, the first one of the show, to say we're filming this on a Thursday, the 23rd of January, and the show releases on the 25th, so it's always possible that things change between now and the release time. Before we move off of Douglas Luiz, though, James, it hasn't quite worked out at Juventus, has it, in the way that perhaps one might have hoped?
No. I mean, David says he is now one to watch. You haven't been able to watch him all that much at Juventus over the last 6 months because he's made only 4 starts. David talked about Villa's PSR compliance issues towards the end of last summer. Douglas Luiz moved on, I think, June 30th, the end of the football accounting year. And Juventus sent a couple of young players the other way, Samuel Lilling Jr. and Enzo Barandiquer, who were immediately moved out on loan. But so, I mean, there were some question marks as to, is this a accounting exercise first, football operation second? But there was a lot of hype and expectation around Douglas Luiz because the value put to him was more than 50 million. Over the last few years, one of the reasons that has been cited as Juventus' decline has been the lack of a midfield, really, up to the standards that they used to have when the likes of Paul Pogba, Marchisio, Pirlo, Vidal were all there. And he was seen as the first big signing of a new era at Juventus with Thiago Motta. Motta himself, a midfield player, from Brazil, played for Italy. And instead, Luiz has had very limited game time. There have been some injuries. When he has come in, he's given away penalties or he's been sent off. And so that hasn't really helped his adjustment. But I think it's somewhat surprising that, only 6 months in, Juventus are willing to countenance proposals for him. Because that midfield still does not look sorted. However, we are recording on a Thursday. On Tuesday, he did start against Club Brugge, and he put in the best performances of his Juventus career so far. So point that people on Sky Italia like Zvonimir Boban, who knows a midfielder when he sees him, was saying, wow, this guy is by far the best midfield player at Juventus. What are they thinking? He can play in every role. So, Juventus are active in this January transfer window because they are 5th in Serie A at the moment. That's not where they want to be. They expect it to be higher, certainly have Champions League football closer to being sort of a sure thing than it feels like at the moment. And, they've got gaps in the team that they need to fill, but they don't necessarily have the money to do that. And so, if there is an opportunity to bring in some money, I think they would do it. So I think that is why, Douglas Luiz is one of the names being mentioned so far this January.
Let's stay in Italy, as I'm often want to, James. Tell me about Patrick Dorgu, who's a Lecce player, who's caught the interest of Manchester United, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, very exciting young player. signed by Pantaleo Cordovino, the sporting director at Lecce, who, over the last 3 decades has always been able to unearth kind of hidden gems, and go straight to source, get them before they've really made a name for themselves. Did that in Serbia for a long time, in Montenegro, both at Lecce and Fiorentina. The guys
that's what I'm trying with this guy, by the way. It's going okay. It's going okay.
But just to rattle off some of the names, Mirko Vucinic, Bodjinov, you're looking at Stevan Jovetic, Nastasic, all the itches. Yeah. He's scratched them. Yeah. And Dorgu, since he's been back at Lecce, Cordovino, it looks like he could be one of the big profits that Cordovino turns. There have been a couple of players that he's signed over the last couple of years who've gone for big money. One to a Ruben Amorim club, he signed Morten Hjulmand for 140 grand, and then Sporting paid 18 million for him. But Dorgu, very athletic player, quick, versatile, has had to play in multiple different positions for Lecce over the last couple of seasons. Plays as a left back, can play on the left of midfield, can play even higher as well. Has been getting among the goals, and his coach last season, Luca Gotti, was making comparisons with Gareth Bale. Now, whether that's at Corvino's instigation to kind of really pump the value of the player,
certainly lofty.
I don't know, but certainly I think, given what we know from Cordovino's past of being able to find these players and then go on to have very good careers, I think that's another reason to kind of believe in Dorgu's talent.
Okay. Well, Manchester United seem to believe in Dorgu's talent, David. What can you tell us about their interest?
Yeah, so they've made an offer. I think, James, you may have reported the numbers, but there's a discrepancy between what they're offering and Lecce want, which is thought to be around 10 million euros. So let's see if that's going to be bridged.
And what was the offer and what is the expectation?
So our reporting was that United were prepared to go to 30 for it. Initially, that was the conversations that they had in Milan earlier this week. And Lecce have a different number in mind, which is 40.
Right.
Which, it's classic negotiating tactic. Sure. So, as David says, we'll see if they can maybe meet in the middle or come to a compromise.
So those talks continue, and it's been quite public, as is the way of the Italian media often, calcio mercato. I don't know about my pronunciation, it's not on James's level. There's sort of images of Manchester United Director of Negotiations, Matt Hargreaves, and some agents that have worked on a number of United deals, in particular involving Italy. So I think back to Amad Diallo and Rasmus Højlund among them, coming out of hotel and meeting rooms. So it's clearly a very active and live situation. And he is clearly the option that Manchester United appear to be going for right now. That's not to say he was or is the only option, because they looked into the PSG left back,
Nuno Mendes.
Yeah, Nuno Mendes, and that was deemed to be too expensive in terms of the fees involved, loan fee, salary, whatever. The breakdown would have been if indeed he would have wanted to move. When you watch him against Manchester City last night, as we record this, you realise he's in a pretty good place as it is. And there are a number of other names United have been looking at. What they want to do at Old Trafford right now is get a number of situations lined up for various different positions, and then make decisions based on both ins and outs. Yeah. And the outs is really important because that will free up the squad space and the finance to be able to do things. So we're looking at the Marcus Rashfords and Antonys of this world.
Antony potentially to Real Betis, is that right?
Yeah, that's an ongoing situation. There were some suggestions it was done and dusted. That wasn't the case, but there are talks. It might well happen, but he has remained in the United squad and available for selection and involved in the action in the meantime. Yeah. That will again come down to finances, wage coverage, which is a big issue at Manchester United, in particular with Marcus Rashford if he's to leave, because that has a massive knock-on effect for what they're able to spend on potential recruits. And so, yeah, I think Antony to Real Betis is progressing, but it's not done yet. and they need to get some of these things done to be able to maybe step up their pursuits of a Dorgu, of maybe a striker at some point before the window closes. There's loads going on at United right now. As they say in this world, spinning plates and moving parts. Let's see what they come out with.
Well, Jhon, Dave has outlined some of the complexities for Manchester United in this January transfer window. I want to ask you about Dorgu specifically simply because I hadn't heard of him before, and I'm curious about why you think they're interested in him specifically.
Yeah, I think this is very much a January transfer, in as much as it's quite an opportunistic one, if they can get the valuations to the level that they want. James has already mentioned that Dorgu, this season in particular, has played quite a flexible role. I think Lecce are in a weird position because two of their best players play in the same position. There's another guy called Antony Gallo, who's a left back, is pretty good as well. So he's been playing the left back position, and as a result, Dorgu's been played elsewhere, which means it's kind of hard to judge what level Dorgu is at, because he's played most of his time, as you can see from this graphic, on the right wing. He's got 10 appearances in the leagues this far in that position, and has played, as we can see, right back all the way along the left wing. So it means that the data that he's putting out this season is really hard to judge, because you just don't have any sort of sample size to make anything of it. And
what about his runs, Jhon? His runs some of the best?
That's true. That is true. I have just spent a long time talking about small sample sizes, but we do have last season where he did play on the left a little bit more, but that was his first season at the club, so a first season in that kind of league. So again, it's quite hard to judge. But as James also mentioned, really nice athletic profile, which I think would suit a left wing back in Manchester United's squad. Manchester United currently probably need two left wing backs, a starting left wing back and a backup. And I think the reason why this actually could work out as almost as a low-key win-win for them is that they have the wherewithal, I think, for the rest of the season to bring in someone like Dorgu, play him, see how well he performs. If he performs well enough to be a starting level player, your quid's in. You've found a really good player for relatively low value, again, depending on where the fee ends up washing out. If he doesn't, then you can say, well, fine, we've got a backup player. Now we can go into the market and we can start thinking about our Nuno Mendes, etc. So yeah, I'm viewing this as them sort of taking their position that in the league right now and thinking, we don't need to make a marquee signing because, it's not going to move the needle. It's not going to, maybe we'll finish mid-table rather than the lower table.
Sure.
This isn't going to move the needle. So use the rest of the season as a chance then to sort of bed in Dorgu and see what level he's at, and then you can make your decision on the basis of that.
Okay, thanks, Jhon. Well, from one Manchester team to another, James, Manchester City, that's the other Manchester, just FYI. They've identified, there are more, aren't there?
FC United of Manchester.
FC United of Manchester, Salford City, I'm wasting my own time, the producer's shaking his head at me.
Newton Heath, still a thing?
No, shush up now. Manchester City have identified Juventus fullback Andrea Cambiaso as a potential replacement for Kyle Walker, who we think is on a plane. That's very exciting, on a plane. Tell me about Andrea Cambiaso.
I mean, quite similar to Dorgu in that he can play multiple positions. He is nominally a fullback. He can play on the left side, he can play on the right side, but he is a very modern football player in that you can consider him a hybrid. He does all of those things that avant-garde coaches want, which is their fullback to come into midfield, their fullback to play essentially different roles rather than one fixed position. So, at Juventus this season, he sometimes even popped up as a shadow striker, playing between the lines. He played a little bit at the Euros for Italy in the summer because Luciano Spalletti particularly likes that kind of profile. And so for a Manchester City squad that is short, that has a limited amount of time to maybe improve the squad between now and the end of the window, having someone who is ductile like this, I think, would make a lot of sense. However, he's been one of Juventus's best players so far this season. He benefited from the fact that he'd already worked with their new coach, Thiago Motta, for a season with Bologna. So he's one of the few plug-and-play players that they've got who's like, I get this system, I can help teach other players what they need to do in these situations. But, as we mentioned with Douglas Luiz, Juventus find themselves in a position where they needed to find someone who could take the goal-scoring burden off Dusan Vlahovic. They've got Randal Kolo Muani coming in to help out with that. they've got players in defence who've suffered bad injuries, ACL tears, your likes of Gleison Bremer and Cabal as well. So they need to improve the defence. So in terms of liquidity, I think, well, not just liquidity regards what their objectives are this season, but Juventus from the point of view of making big losses over the last few years and then having to bring in a new coach who they've invested very heavily in, and they're sort of middling at the moment in terms of performance. They could use maybe a little bit of liquidity to go and strengthen in areas where they feel they need strengthening. But let's see. I mean, Cambiaso is a very smart young Italian player who will be in the Italy squad, I would say, for years to come. And we're seeing more and more Italian players come over to the Premier League with differing, sort of outcome, different success. Calafiori is still settling in at Arsenal, Tonali at Newcastle, finally having his first season, really.
Yeah.
Chiesa, sort of has been injured only recently, has been starting to make some cameos. So, I mean, Premier League clubs, they seem to love shopping in Serie A. It's not just City, but United. They just keep going back.
That's
Højlund,
true.
Ahmad,
Yeah.
Amrabat in the past.
And Premier League players appear to also enjoy moving to Serie A. I mean, you mentioned earlier, Kyle Walker. This is the biggest. It's Thursday. We're releasing this video on Saturday. Statement of the show, I think. But you said Kyle Walker's on a plane now on the way to Milan.
Yeah, not in this time lapse between Thursday and Saturday.
Yeah,
that'd be a long flight.
Very long flight.
Just circling, sort of going to land in Milan Linate. But yes, I mean, I think this has been going on for the best part of sort of 10 days.
Yeah.
But Milan. If we talk about Juventus maybe underperforming this season, Milan even more so, 8th in the table. They've had a problem position at right back for some time. Their solution to that problem position in the summer was to go and spend 18 million euro for Emerson Royal. Now, I think Daniel Levy's done some great business in the past. You think of selling Gareth Bale to Real Madrid, but getting 18 million or so for Emerson Royal must rank as one of his greatest deals.
Down in history.
It won't surprise you that Emerson Royal hasn't worked out.
No.
At AC Milan, even though he did get the Man of the Match award against Como recently.
That's true.
And so there's a feeling that they could still improve in that position. That Walker, still, I think he's 35 in May, has got, sort of pace, that propulsion that would give them a bit more balance on that side, because Theo Hernandez just goes on the left-hand side. They haven't really had someone like that on the right. And if you listen to Zlatan, now in his sort of executive senior advisor role, he feels the team needs leadership, experience, and they feel that that Walker can do that in a very international dressing room that has very few Italians of note in it. That someone like Walker can come in and make an impact on the pitch, but also in the locker room as well.
Okay, well, I'll be fascinated to see. I mean, on that Milan news, David, I'm going to come and ask you about Marcus Rashford next. Before we do that, though, let's hear from Phil Hay from the FC newsletter with something just a little bit interesting.
If I asked you to name the city that hosts world football's oldest derby, would you say Milan? Or maybe Glasgow? Or Liverpool? Or even Buenos Aires? The answer is, in fact, Sheffield, deep in mining country in the north of England. And it's not Sheffield Wednesday against Sheffield United either. It's Sheffield FC versus Hallam, a game that first took place back in 1860. Sheffield FC happened to be the oldest club in the world too. They're in the 8th tier in England, but when the clubs met this week, it didn't stop traditional derby rules applying. No pyro, no party. We bring you all this and more in the Athletic FC newsletter. Click on the link below to sign up.
Hey, thanks, Phil. And by the way, viewer, you can subscribe to the Athletic FC newsletter for free. Do so by clicking the link in the description. Now, David, tell me about Marcus Rashford. What the hell's going on?
That is a very good question. One we don't have an answer to right now. So what the hell is going on? Look, he has, you've talked about AC Milan there. They were one of the clubs that had a look at him and were interested. For whatever reason, that did not evolve. It may have been a two-way thing. There have been the likes of Borussia Dortmund looking at the situation, but they're in a very tricky predicament of their own domestically and in Europe, which may not have appealed so much to Rashford. And the financials involved in this may not have appealed ultimately so much to Borussia Dortmund. But Barcelona is the one that I understand Rashford would favour if he is to leave Manchester United. That's not without its complications due to their financial issues, it's fair to say.
That's such a light way of framing that.
And a lot of people have said to me around this story, they can't even register their own players, let alone bring somebody in.
Yeah.
It's not that straightforward. It's actually a bit trickier for them to register their own players than to bring new players in.
Right.
If they could get some players out of the club, then they can sign pretty much anybody they want if they can make the numbers work. There's a lot of ifs in there.
Yeah.
But it is possible. It is being worked upon, but that does not mean to say it will happen. And therefore, with that sort of emerging as his preferred choice, should he go, and it having some problems in it, the door has to remain open at Manchester United. He's under contract there until 2028. He appeared on Wednesday training with a smile on his face ahead of the Europa League tie against Rangers. So there is a world in which he decides that he doesn't want to move, or Manchester United can't strike the deal, or a bit of everything, and they have to have a think about reintegration. I think Manchester United would like to move him on. They kind of initiated this process, and they would like a club to come and take all of his wages for the remainder of the season. Will Marcus Rashford take, as they call it in the industry, a haircut, a bit of a reduction to his money? I doubt it. I don't think many players would do that unless they were absolutely desperate to get out. And he hasn't ever explicitly asked to leave. He did say in an interview that he's ready for a fresh challenge, but he never specified what that fresh challenge was. Is it under Amrin at Manchester United? Is it elsewhere? And so it's a pretty messy situation. And from the conversations I've had around it, it could definitely go down to deadline day and be one of those dramas that we love so much in the media, and clubs seem to be like magnetically attracted towards. But it's not until the end that something starts to give and people drop the pretense and the big I am around, we're going to get this and we're not going to do this. And then everybody says, we better get on with it.
Yeah.
So I could definitely see a departure still, but it's not set in stone. Even though the market doesn't have a long time to go, there is still plenty of opportunity for things to happen, and Rashford will be in the hub of that.
Yeah. Well, it brings me to my final question to you, and just briefly.
Is that possible with me?
I don't know. We're going to find out. Just briefly, if you can, as you look forward to deadline day, aside from Rashford, what else excites you? Like, what are the possibilities out there that you think you might be talking about next week? Definitely
Arsenal.
Yeah.
Because they are working to make something happen. We don't know exactly what that something is just yet in the attacking department, clearly. And I think Tottenham have some work to do. There's some financial room for manoeuvre, and in the attacking line and in the defensive line, they would like to strengthen if they can. Initially, it was sounding like they would do some loans after the arrival of Kinski, but maybe they even look to go down the permanent route now that they're struggling so badly with injuries, so badly in the Premier League, yet they have opportunity in 2 cup competitions domestically and a 3rd continentally. And so I'm going to put my focus on the North London rivals, Arsenal and Tottenham. Is that brief enough?
That was brief, David. Terrific work. Thank you very much. Now, let me come to you, James. We're wrapping up here talking about Serie A. There's one name that comes to the lips of the producer I know, Garnacho. We've just been reading that Napoli are interested, maybe have made a bid. What can you tell me about that? And then anything else deadline day specific?
Well, look, Napoli are top of the league in Italy at the moment. They've got a wallflower of a coach in Antonio Conte, who, likes to tell the sporting director and the owner there that, now's the time to make on if you want to win the league. They've sold Kvaratskhelia, who went to PSG, which I think is the biggest move of the transfer window so far, which certainly gives them A, bit of a liquidity, and B, I think they want to strengthen in that position as well. And so that's why Manna, their sporting director, has been to see Garnacho's agents in Spain. But David will know better than me. I think when it comes to valuation, I think you already reported this, what Man United think the player is worth and what Napoli have so far been prepared to go for has been quite different.
Another gap, huh?
Yeah, it was around the £40 million euro mark, and United want far more than that for such a... well, he's a very good player. He's pretty important to them. He's young and he will represent pretty much pure profit. They paid a little bit to Atletico Madrid for him. But I know you'll come back to Italy. Napoli are not the only team interested in him. Chelsea like him as well. They've inquired about him. They've inquired about Jamie Gittins at Borussia Dortmund, which makes you think, and there's other options at Stamford Bridge as well, it makes you think they might bring in a wide player. And certainly Garnacho is in that conversation. And I should have mentioned it earlier, but I do think Garnacho has a very good chance of being a mover before the deadline. And if they get the price that they want or something close to that, that's a massive moment for Manchester United and their financial strife, their PSR compliance, and it will allow them to do a hell of a lot more inbound, especially we've talked about in recent weeks on The Athletic, the likes of Kobbie Mainoo, Rashford, Malacia, Casemiro. But the way things are developing, it's kind of making you feel that Garnacho is the one who could go. Continue.
I mean, Antonio Conte loves a Man United player. Inter, for example, you think if he took Lukaku, Ashley Young, McTominay's got Lukaku now, Napoli as well.
All the stars.
Well, it's almost like he's saying, look what I could have done with Man United.
He came close to being appointed. He seems to like Man United players more than Man United like Man United players.
Exactly. But McTominay's had a fantastic 6 months there.
Yeah.
It's quite an easy pitch for Napoli to do to an Argentine. Say, come to Napoli, club of Diego Maradona. They'll make murals of you. And also, you say with McTominay, Napoli are top of the league at the moment. Yeah, it's a very competitive title race in Italy, but there's a chance to win something there. There's a chance to win only the fourth league title in the club's history, which, it'll come relatively quick after the last one, which only happened the season before last.
But after last season.
But to be a part of that is quite big, really. So it'll be interesting to see if they could do a deal for Garnacho, and if they do anything else. As well, because I think now is the time. You can imagine Antonio Conte holding Napoli's feet to the fire between now and February the 3rd. In terms of let's see if we can give ourselves an even better chance of winning this league.
Yeah, I mean they just sold Kvaratskhelia to PSG, right? So there's money there you would expect.
Yeah, although they spent very big in the summer, and they expected to bring in more money than they did because they expected Victor Osimhen to go either to a club in Saudi Arabia or even come to the Premier League with either Chelsea or Manchester United. Ultimately, a deal could not be done, and he was moved on loan to Galatasaray outside the, let's say, Western European transfer window. So there was some need to bring in money from a deal, as we've seen with Kvaratskhelia, but ultimately, Napoli are on course to be back in the Champions League next year, so they can budget for that. And there is money to spend. I mean, it's been a very well-run club financially, quite prudent, similar, I would say, to Tottenham under Levy, where they almost always turn a profit at Napoli. De Laurentiis notoriously hard to negotiate with. But with this coach, with the position that they're in, I think it allows them to be quite bullish in the final fortnight of the transfer window.
Terrific. Well, thanks everyone. We won't be here next week, but we will be here with a live show on deadline day, featuring most of the people that you can see here. Not us, but them. So see you then.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.